I like to read, so we're going to talk about all the books that I read in 2024. There are some things that I would like to bring up before I mention all of the books that I read this year. Number one, I used to be a reader. I used to be the reader. I took great pride in it. I took great joy in it. Reading was my thing. Reading was who I was. After college, I lost my habit of reading. I did. I lost that part of me. And it was because, and I've done some soul searching about it, I somehow guilted myself about reading. I associated reading with having free time, and I felt bad about it because I was like, why am I doing this when I could be working? And it was really bad. And outside of like perhaps fan fiction or reading a small novel here and then, I was not reading the way that I used to read. And it made me feel sad. And so I told myself last year that I was gonna build up the habit of reading again, because why am I feeling guilty reading? Why would I do that to myself? That was dumb. And so last year, I was really excited because I read 11 books. I was so excited about it last year. I was like, you know what? I did it. I sucked it up and I read 11 books because I ended up creating this like habit where every single day, if I can, if it's possible, I try to read 20 minutes a day, which doesn't seem like much, but it's the way that I've been able to trick my brain into not feeling bad for having hobbies, because that's dumb. And I'm very happy to say that this year I exceeded that number by quite a bit, and so I'm going to talk about them today. I also wanted to mention the fact that I am not like a booktuber, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way, just that I am not a part of that, I guess, community in that way. I don't have a Goodreads. I don't have any kind of digital way to count how many books I'm reading in what genres. I don't have any of those statistics. I watch a lot of videos about books that I've never heard of in my life, but I personally am not up to date with that. I'm also just not, I'm not into romance. I'm not into a lot of like YA. And so a lot of the books that I read are books that are like super, super old that people just recommended to me. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll read it. Or books that I found at the bookstore that I read the back of it and I was like, okay, that looks cool. I don't care that it's like 25 years old. And so just keep that in mind for when I talk about the books that I read. I also don't have like a Kindle or anything. I read a book, and then if I finish it, I write it down. If I decide to not read it anymore, then I just put it on a different color sticky note. And so I have 3 sticky notes for the year. Isn't that exciting? So the first book that I read this year was Slewfoot by Brom. He is the author and the illustrator of this book. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I bought it specifically because of the cover. Because I do judge books by their cover. I'm an illustrator and I would like you guys to do the same. If and whenever I come out with a book cover, I would like you to tell me if you bought it because the art was pretty. That would make my day. A lot of the reviews were like, oh, if you really like feminine rage, if you really like the movie The Witch, you're gonna love this. And I didn't like it as much as I thought I was going to, but it's still really entertaining. I don't really know how I can describe Slewfoot because admittedly it's been a while since I read it. I read this back in January. But 2, I don't know how to feel about it still to this day. I can't tell if I like it or if I don't like it at all. Does that make sense? Because I read the whole thing. It was entertaining. I enjoyed it. I love the art specifically. I liked the vibes. But I feel like there was always something that was missing for me. And I can't really put my finger on it right now. I remember reading this and thinking multiple times, oh, this could be really interesting. And then something happened and I was like, okay. I just think that parts of it were a bit muddled, were a bit messy. And I do have my critiques of it. It's nothing like serious. It's just a lot of like, I think my main issue with the book is pacing. I think it's a really long book. And if it's gonna be that long, I would like it to be entertaining the entire way through. And maybe it's just me, but I just didn't really care about the titular character Slewfoot all that much, if I'm being honest. The more we spent time with him, the more I didn't care about him. Right? Because I think with The Witch, for example, I love The Witch. I don't care. A lot of people find it boring. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I don't care. I think the reason it works is because Black Phillip is such an enigma, okay? Like, you know, the audience knows. Like, that's not a normal goat. That's not right. But it's like, it's just an ominous presence. But the goat itself doesn't speak until right at the end. And that's why I like it. Whereas I think with Slewfoot, there's too much focus on this like amnesia plot line that he's got going on. And I would get frustrated because I bought this book because I wanted to focus on Abatha. I wanted to focus on the girl, you know? And so sometimes I was like, I don't care. I don't care about what this goat man's going through.
I really liked the part of his backstory that explained that he wasn't even really the devil or a representation of something demonic either. He's an ancient being and the colonists just associate him with that. That part I liked. It's the execution that kind of bored me.
I also would just get frustrated at times because I felt like Abatha as a character, sometimes I really liked her, and then sometimes I would like roll my eyes at her because there were like certain tropes that I was like, okay, whatever. Sometimes I would just get annoyed with her because she would do things that were outright witchcraft, and then she'd be like, I can't believe that the puritanical townspeople are mad at me for doing these things. I can't believe that they're so upset. I would never have known. Girl, be a little bit more discreet. Because there were moments, like, I don't want to spoil everything, but there is a moment where she has created this, like, she's made a bunch of, like, I want to say a wreath made out of her own hair and, like, bones. And she had it in her, like, home. And then when people are like, girl, what is that? She's like, y'all never seen a hair wreath? I can't help you. I did really like, and this probably sounds really morbid, I liked it when she was actually finally accused of witchcraft. I liked the trial. I liked the whole, we're gonna start accusing other people, tense nature of it. We're gonna throw rocks at you.
Open the door or I'm gonna throw rocks through your window.
The next series of books that I read were the Oz books by L. Frank Baum, and then the last Oz book that I read was by Ruth Plummy Thompson. I don't want to have to talk about this all again. I have made 3 YouTube videos about my journey into reading the Oz books. I read the original 14 and then the last one because they came in a 15 book box set. I will no longer be reading any more of the Oz books because I didn't like Ruth Plummy Thompson's writing. I have talked about them extensively. Please check out those videos. I had a lot of fun doing it. I had a lot of fun getting involved in Oz lore, but I can't talk about it anymore. I can't. For my own mental health, it needs to end here, people. That being said, if you are interested in reading the Oz books, I have the list of all of the books that I read in order. I read The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, The Marvelous Land of Oz, Ozma of Oz, Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, The Road to Oz, Emerald City of Oz, The Patchwork Girl of Oz, TikTok of Oz, The Scarecrow of Oz, Rinky-Tink in Oz, The Lost Princess of Oz, The Tin Woodman of Oz, The Magic of Oz, Glinda of Oz, and then the last one was The Royal Book of Oz. I've read a lot of Oz books this year, okay? Obviously, after I read this collection of the Oz books, I couldn't help myself. I had to read Wicked. The thing about Wicked is that it has been on my shelf for years. I originally purchased this when I was far too young. I don't even think I purchased this. I think my mom bought it, not knowing the content of this book, gave it to me. I think I read the first chapter was not vibing it, was not processing it. And then I put it back on my shelf and I kept telling myself, oh, I'll read it eventually, I'll read it eventually. And since I read the Oz books, I was like, well, it's the perfect time. I can finally read Wicked and understand what's happening. And honestly, I really loved Wicked. I genuinely enjoyed this book. I think a lot of the discussions about the Wicked book feel very hyperbolic. Obviously, it is not a book for younger audiences, but I think the way that people talk about it, like it's this X-rated, horrifying book, is a bit much, because honestly, I really enjoyed it. The pacing was great. I liked the way that the characters were written. There's murder, there's terrorism, there's political conspiracies, there's propaganda, there's affairs, there is, you know, sexual content. It's nothing that I thought was like overly graphic and crazy. You can probably skip it if you want. I know that there's a sequel, and I was considering reading all of the Wicked books, but honestly, I think this is a good standalone as is. One thing that I really enjoyed about reading Wicked is that it's very obviously written by somebody who has read the source material. It's written by somebody who, even if they didn't follow it to a T and clearly like expanded on it and changed things and maybe mashed some characters together, it clearly comes from somebody who knows what they're talking about. There are a lot of Easter eggs that if you have just read the first Oz book or have only seen The Wizard of Oz, you're not going to catch the first time that you read it. Personally, if you ask me, even though obviously I enjoyed Wicked, I like the characters in the book better, specifically Fiyero. I feel like I understand what they were trying to do with musical Fiyero. I do think that it's because they kind of like merged him with one of the other characters that shows up in here. Fiyero in the books is a dark-skinned prince who has to deal with like casual racism a lot, and I feel like that element of his character really helps him to bond with Elphaba. Also, he's married. There's a lot of critiques of religious fanaticism with Nessa Rose. Her father is a very different person in this book. If you read this book after watching the movie, you are going to be so confused, because this man is not, you know, the governor. He's like a religious man in a throuple. I also feel like a lot of people are giving people false hopes about reading the book. I see a lot of people tell other people online that Elphaba and Glinda are like canon in the book. Not true. They are not a thing in the book. I do read Glinda as a lesbian, but that does not mean that they are dating and together in the book. Stop lying to people.
One more thing before I stop talking about Wicked, I do want to encourage people who are going to read it to at least look up if there are any trigger warnings that they would want to watch out for, because while I do think that a lot of the people that are talking about Wicked are being very extreme, I do think that if you've only ever seen the musical, it might come as a bit of a shock. It might be a bit jarring, especially certain things like with Elphaba's mother. You might want to do your own research beforehand. It is an adult book, so just keep that in mind.
After I read the Oz books and I read Wicked, I felt like I was in the same universe for so long. I was reading kind of like the lore for the same thing over and over again. So I needed like a palate cleanser. And so I picked up the graphic novel, The Sleeper and The Spindle. I've had this on my bookshelf, I want to say for almost 2 years, and never actually like committed to reading it. It is unfortunate for me that I had it on my list to read after the Oz books before the Neil Gaiman allegations came out. And so that did kind of sour the way I felt about it. Screw Neil Gaiman, we're talking about Chris Rydell. I could stare at it for days. That's the main reason I bought it anyway. Like, I'm obsessed with it. Sometimes I pick it up just to look at the art. I think it's so nice. I wish I could do black and white like this. Synopsis of this. Basically, Snow White is the main character. She has committed acts of heroism before. She goes on adventures with the 7 dwarves, and she like saves people. She has her own thing. It's really great. I liked seeing her like outfits in this because it's very much knight core. She's like in armor and she has a sword. She has beautiful long black hair. There's like a curse sweeping through the land where everyone is like falling asleep, and it can make people into like kind of like sleepwalking zombies the closer you get to the reason for the curse. And there is a sleeping princess, so obviously it's Sleeping Beauty. The two kiss and she wakes up, but then it's revealed that it was the witch all along who has been taking the life force from the princess. It was really quick to read. I read it in a day. I think I was bamboozled. So many people on like Tumblr were saying that it's like, you know, like a sapphic graphic novel recommendation. And like, yeah, sure, like they kiss once, but it's not, she's not even really Sleeping Beauty. They don't end up together. I would love to read more stories like this though, because I love fairy tale retellings, especially if the girls get to have swords. After that, I decided to commit to rereading the Iliad and the Odyssey. And so I think it's obvious that I have thoughts, but these are thoughts that have been percolating in my brain since I was 12 years old. And so, you know, can I really give you an accurate synopsis real quick about the Iliad and the Odyssey? No, because I'll talk forever. I've had this exact copy of the Iliad translated by Robert Fagles since I was 12 years old. Because when Porter's bookstore was closing in Plaza Las Americas, they were like, hey, we're having a sale. Everything must go. In the arms of the angel. And for some reason, 12-year-old me was like, it's time. I don't think that I truly grasped everything. I think at the time I was like, I'm such an intellectual. And, you know, every time I read it, I gain something else. I can't stop. I think I read the Iliad and the Odyssey like almost every 5-ish years. And not even because I set out to do it. It's that every few years I'm like, you know what? I'm in the mood to just read about Helen again. I must speak about Helen. I must defend Helen. It's like in my brain at this point. It rewired my brain chemistry. As you can tell. These are new. I used to have the paper ones on it and they kept falling off. And then when I reread it this year, I made notes. I made more notes. There were always notes in here. I have been writing in this since I was 12 years old, and sometimes I can tell. One, I think my lettering has changed drastically. When I was 12, I was just saying anything. Do you know how many times I've read a moment in here and thought, what did 12-year-old me think? And then to the side, it just says gay. And this time, I don't know what it is. I don't know why. For some reason, reading this again this year hit for no reason. Also, you know that meme that's like, this isn't about who the most moral person is, it's about who's your favorite war criminal. That's just something you have to deal with when you read ancient Greek stories. I also have this copy of the Odyssey, also translated by Robert Fagles, but this year I actually purchased the Emily Wilson translated version of the Odyssey, and I read through it so quickly. And since I really would like to reread my copy of Robert Fagles' translation and think about it like back to back, like what are the deliberate choices that Emily Wilson made, and, you know, does that change anything? I would like to do a comparison between the two. I just didn't feel like doing it this year, you know? But I will say this. I have read, you know, these copies for years of my life, and obviously I have a good time doing it. But I don't remember if it's that the Odyssey is just quicker to get through, I think, or if it's that just Emily Wilson's way of translating it felt so smooth. I think if you're like a beginner when it comes to Greek mythology and you want to find like a copy of the Odyssey that you feel like you can read, I think Emily Wilson is pretty good. And once again, as always, because I keep telling my friends who don't care about this, and I'm sorry if I keep harassing you about it, the way that Athena interacts with other characters, the way that she perceives gender, it's fascinating to me. I genuinely don't know. Also, I just think the Odyssey's funny. Is it a tragedy? Yes, yes it is. But parts of it are funny. I can't deny that. Also, shout out to Helen. Shout out to Helen makes a cameo in this, if you were unaware. The next book that I read was The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, and I'm pretty sure that I have a collection of H.G. Wells stories somewhere in this house, but for some reason I've never bothered to read The Island of Dr. Moreau, even though I've watched the movie adaptations. Dr. Moreau is what the general public thinks Dr. Frankenstein is. For context, I am a Frankenstein lover. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I'm obsessed with Mary Shelley. I reread it a lot. Frankly, I think I'm due for another reread. I am obsessed with it all the time. I love watching adaptations and critiquing said adaptations, and I always think that when people are like, oh, this is Frankenstein coded, they really just mean that there's a mad scientist and he created something, you know? Sometimes it can be Frankenstein coded. I can see it, right? But other times it's like, that's Dr. Moreau. That's not Victor. That's Dr. Moreau. In this, the entire time, even though obviously I sympathize with the creatures and there's so much going on, there's no ethics here. He really is doing things simply to see if he can. He's not even the main character. We're not seeing it through his, POV. And that's why I find him so interesting. This man was shunned from Europe, and he just went off to a tropical island in the Pacific to just reap havoc. I think if you're into mad science, this is probably like Mad Scientist 101. It's actually shocking that I haven't read it till now, but I enjoyed it. The horrors of non-ethical science. Next book that I read was The Goblin Market and Other Poems by Christina Rossetti. I am not really a poetry person. I'm not. It's not the way that my brain is wired. I'm sure that if I sat down and I read a poem, I would be able to be like, oh, this is what I can get out of that. But overall, poetry is just not my thing. It's not the way that I enjoy reading unless it's like an epic poem or like a really long narrative poem. I do think that this is a me problem, and that's something that I would like to get better at, but I struggle with finding poetry that I actually enjoy. And that's on me, I think. If you have any poetry recommendations, please let me know. But the reason that I even got this one was because I had a really weird dream that vaguely reminded me of an illustration of the Goblin Market that I had saved on Pinterest. And I had a curiosity, and I wanted to know if it was actually similar at all. It actually kind of was. There were Muppets in it. I won't elaborate any further. The next book that I read was What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. Admittedly, though, I will say I read this because I saw it on TikTok, and I would read it again, and I would read the sequel. I had a good time, but it definitely wasn't my favorite book of 2024. I just think that the pacing at the start of the book was a bit slow, but once you get down to like the actual plot, it's really fun. It's really entertaining. I enjoyed reading it. Sometimes I would read more than my allotted 20 minutes so that I could finish a chapter. I think my issue with pacing was only because the main character, Easton, uses different pronouns. I think the author was trying too hard to like justify it within like the lore of the story, why everyone respected their pronouns and used their pronouns. And I don't think we had to do all of that. Like sometimes I would be like, this feels like an over explanation when we could just say that in this universe, that's fine. But once you get past that and the plot really starts to pick up, it's fun.
And don't get me wrong, the explanation is necessary for what will eventually happen with the creature, but I just felt like it was a little clunky.
I also just like a lot of the imagery. I like all of the animals with their like wide-eyed stare. I love Madeline's character and the way that she was just like haunting this house. I like the random British woman who was an expert in mycology, so approved. Piranesi by Susanna Clark. I have been trying to get other people to read this, but I'm having such a hard time describing the general aura of this book because it's so odd, and I don't want to spoil anything. I came into this blind. I only purchased it because I heard a rumor that Leica Studios might make an adaptation of this, and I like Leica movies. I don't know how to describe this. Basically, there is a man, and he lives in this world where it's like a labyrinth. It's just halls and halls of big, huge statues, and it's constantly flooding, and he keeps track of the tides, and he knows what he has to do to hunt for food, and he counts how many dead human people are in this universe, and he talks about them as if they are living beings that he knows personally. And he writes in his journals, but he doesn't seem to have the same concept of time that we do. All he knows is that the house that he lives in, the world that he lives in, will provide. And you have to like unlock a mystery as it goes on. So spoiler alert, I'm not going to spoil everything, but I do have something that I would like to discuss. So if you don't want to see examples of what is written in this book, you can like skip to the next book that I'm talking about. But one of the things that I really kept thinking about after I read this book is the way that Piranesi talks about himself. After leaving the labyrinth and going back into like the real world, he has to deal with the fact that he no longer sees himself as who he used to be. It's not like in a lot of fictional stories where the person suddenly remembers who they used to be and that's it, they're back to normal. In this story, he goes back into the real world, but he has to deal with the fact that that's who he used to be. That's not who he is now. And he sees himself kind of fragmented. Like he sees that Piranesi is one person, Rose Sorensen is another person, and that he is now a new person. And he can like play along with his friends and family who are happy to have him back, but he knows that he will never be Rose Sorensen again. And so it says, Piranesi is always with me, but of Rose Sorensen, I only have hints and shadows. I piece him together out of the objects he has left behind, from what is said about him by other people, and of course, from his journals. Without the journals, I would be all at sea. And for some reason, I really love that. Because I guess you could say that it's like a tragic ending, but this character is so hopeful that he doesn't see it as, I'm never going to be the same person again. He just kind of sees it as a given. Like, I am never going to be the same person again. Know that when I count how many books I read, I don't care what the book is. I don't care if it's a graphic novel. I don't care if it's a comic book. I don't care if it's a children's book. I don't care if it's a big, big novel. I count all of the books that I read. Which is why my next one is a children's picture book. Some more context for those of you that don't know this. I'm also obsessed with Beauty and the Beast. I have been since I was a child. She was my favorite princess ever, and it created this lifelong obsession that I have, I think, with creatures. I think with creature features, what have you. Any Beauty and the Beast style thing, I'm obsessed with. And so one thing that I started doing, I want to say fairly recently, I think I started doing this in college, I collect Beauty and the Beast illustrated copies. Whenever I find a cute or interesting version of Beauty and the Beast, put it in the cart. And so recently, I wanted to find a very specific version of Beauty and the Beast by Sheila Beckett. Well, not by Sheila Beckett, she illustrates it. And I didn't find the exact copy that I was looking for, but I did find this used abridged version. The only reason I really wanted to find this copy is because this is a version of Beauty and the Beast where, yes, the prince is cursed, but he's not even cursed to be like a bear or a lion or a crocodile or anything. He's cursed to just be a regular human man who happens to be like a little ugly. That's it. And the way that they talk about him honestly could just be bullying, because nothing in the text changes. It is the exact same general Beauty and the Beast text, but the guy's just some guy. He's just some guy, and for some reason I find that delightful. Beauty did not want to hurt the Beast, of whom she had grown fond, but she was unwilling to marry such a hideous creature. Literature. After that, I read Monstrilio, and this is a really weird book, but I genuinely really loved it. And whenever I would like describe what I was reading to my friends at the time, they all looked at me like, that's really weird. But I think they should know that about me by now, and you know, you should read it. You should give it a chance. I enjoyed it. It's so odd. And I kept seeing people online after I read it describe it as the kind of story that should be turned into an A24 movie. And while I can get it, I can see the vision, may I recommend this? Guillermo del Toro. The main plot line of this is that there is a husband and wife who have recently lost a child. And that loss pushes them to get a divorce. And she moves back to Mexico to be with her mom and her best friend, who she kind of has an odd relationship with because her best friend is clearly in love with her. There's a whole thing going on there. And she, in her grief, sort of fixates on this idea that she can grow a chunk of her son's lung into a new person because she was told like a folk tale. And she did it out of like wanting, I guess, some kind of connection to her dead son. And it does eventually happen. It grows into a creature, and it's not a humanoid creature. It's this like furry lump with teeth that's hungry, and it likes blood, and she feeds it at night. She keeps it a secret until it can't be kept a secret anymore, and everything kind of spirals from there. And the book is divided into point of view. So it's divided into the main woman's point of view, it's divided into her friend's point of view, her husband's point of view, and then eventually the monster gets its own point of view. And there's a lot about sexuality, about repression, about family in this, and I really enjoyed it. I don't want to spoil everything. I liked it. It made me feel sad at the end, but in a good way. After that, I read Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed, and once again picked it up because of the cover. I do have notes. I think the main theme of this book is hunger. Take that as you will. And I think that the main character has Carrie White energy. So, you know, there's a lot of repression, insecurity, parental abuse, and something is going to build up until it snaps. There are some trigger warnings that I feel like I should bring up because I think based off the cover, you might think that this is like a teen book. There's a lot in this, so I think you should know that going in. I went into this blind, but I don't really have a problem with that kind of stuff unless it's like really graphic. I think my main critique is that when it comes to the main character, they didn't go far enough, because I kept thinking that, spoiler alert, you can skip if you want to, I kept thinking she was gonna eat somebody. I kept thinking that the big climax was that she was gonna straight up eat somebody, because the plot twist is that Marlene Chen, I think that's how you say it, she has been a creature this entire time. She's been a monster this entire time. It's been a spell of her father's. Her father is like a wizard. They're witches, by the way. And he has been forcing her to turn, without her knowledge, to deliver food to him because he is constantly starving because of a spell that was placed upon him, a curse that was placed upon him. And the way that it was built up, I kept thinking, oh, she's gonna snap, she's gonna turn, she's gonna eat somebody. I just, you know, I kept hoping for, I kept wanting her to eat somebody. I'm sorry, I kept wanting her to eat somebody. I kept going, yes, eat him. She didn't eat him. Another critique that I have going off of what I just said is that I think the monster storyline could have been fleshed out more. I know that the entire point was that it was like the plot twist that she was the monster the entire time, but I feel like they could have added it in more into the storyline, because once I was already like around here, I completely forgot about the monster thing until it was brought up again. Like, it's mentioned briefly at the start that, you know, people have been found dead, right? And then we follow the main character through a lot of stuff, and then it feels like it wasn't brought up again until it was relevant. And I feel like they could have sprinkled it in more. I enjoyed the general aesthetic of this book a lot, because I think when it comes to fantasy books, a lot of them tend to be vaguely Western European, whereas this one is Eastern Europe. Another thing that I really liked is the way that her hunger is written. Like, there were moments where she would say something so off the rails. After that, I wanted to take a break from fiction, and I read Medieval Monsters by Damien Kempf and Maria Gilbert, and it's exactly what it says here. It's about medieval monsters. I just wanted to have a good time. And it has tabs, but it's not because I'm saving like a specific paragraph or something. It's because I'm saving very specific creature illustrations so I can doodle them later. Like this little bird lady. And I kept taking pictures and sending them to my friends and be like, this is you. Finally, the last book that I am still currently reading is the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Saints. I went through an angel phase last year where I read like 3 textbooks on angelology for fun, mainly because I wanted to draw angels, like those weird throne angels, and I drew them in my sketchbook. You can see it, I think, in the sketchbook tour. I've made stickers of it and everything. But because of that, I wanted to also learn more about Catholic saints. Not even because I'm particularly religious, but because I was raised Catholic. Why am I feeling guilty reading? Why would I do that to myself? And I have a fascination with art history, and I would like to be able to, off the top of my head, if I see a art history painting, go like, that's Saint Agatha, you know, like just off the dome kind of thing. It's not, I do have critiques of the way that this is organized and some of the way that this is written, but overall, you know, it's an encyclopedia. It's doing what it needs to do, you know? This is the 29th book on the list, and, you know, New Year's is coming up soon, and I really would have liked to have already been on book 30, and hopefully have read, like, 30 books this year. Don't want to jinx myself. Maybe I can still do that. Christmas is literally next week as I'm filming this. And so who knows? That being said, at this present time, I'm not even halfway through it, and it's because Arcane came out, and I can only think about those lesbians. I can only think about Arcane. And so sometimes I'm like, I gotta get work done, and I just don't do my 20 minutes, which is bad because I set up a habit. My phone reminds me, oh, don't you want to set a timer for 20 minutes? So I think once I can finish this and actually read a fiction book where I can like focus on a story, I'll get back to that. So I don't want to jinx myself and say that I only read 29 books this year. I would like to say I made it to 30. I would like to say that it's a clean number, you know? Honestly, I'm just so proud of myself that I even got to read this many books, especially considering part of the goal was finishing this box set, and I really thought this would take me all year, and I read them so quickly. It's the power of obsession. This is it for me for 2024, and I hope you enjoyed it. I know that this started out as an art channel, and for some reason these past few months suddenly it became a book channel because I couldn't stop yapping about Oz. But if you're here for book stuff, I hope you enjoyed this little wrap up, and I hope you will stick around for other things, because now that I know that people are actually interested in watching me just ramble on and on about books, I will probably be making more videos because I want to get back to being the reader, okay? And I enjoy it, and I like doing it, and this gives me more motivation to actually suck it up and build good habits.